Across Britain, churches stand as some of our oldest and most enduring landmarks. For centuries, they have been the centres of village life and the anchors of city streets. They have heard prayers and confessions, witnessed marriages and funerals, and sheltered generations beneath their towers and spires. They are keepers of memory, stone-bound witnesses to joy and grief, conflict and plague. Beneath their walls lie the bones of the dead, echoing centuries of human hope and fear. It's perhaps no surprise, then, that churches are among the most haunted places in Britain. In this episode, I travel from the ruins of St Mary's Old Church at Clophill in rural Bedfordshire, a church haunted by stories of black magic, to the bombed remains of Christ Church Greyfriars in the heart of London, where centuries of devotion gave way to fire and ruin. Together, they reveal how churches, wherever they stand, carry with them not only faith and beauty, but also the shadows of all that has passed within their orbit. Rural and urban, sacred and profane. Churches as sanctuaries, and as sites where the veil between worlds feels thin. On a hill at the edge of the Bedfordshire village of Clophill stand the ruins of St Mary's. Built in the 14th century, the church served as the spiritual heart of the community until 1848, when a new Victorian parish church was raised in the village below. It's interesting to note that in 1904, the Victoria History of the County of Bedford included the following about the old church. The churchyard possessed the unenviable reputation of being a haunt of body snatchers, and many human bones have been dug up in the fields of Brickwall Farm. Exposed to the elements and left to crumble, its roofless shell became little more than a landmark for walkers and farmers until the 1960s, when Clophill was thrust into the national consciousness by a gruesome crime. On the evening of Tuesday the 22nd of August 1961, lovers Michael Gregston and Valerie Story were confronted by an armed man. At gunpoint, the stranger forced Michael to drive through the night until they reached a lay-by on the A6 near Deadman's Hill, a few miles from Clophill. In the early hours of the following morning, the gunman shot Michael twice at close range. He died almost instantly. Valerie was raped, shot, and left for dead. Miraculously, she survived, though she suffered a catastrophic injury that left her paralysed. The crime, soon dubbed the A6 murder, shocked the nation. Within weeks, police arrested James Hanratty. Convicted of capital murder, Hanratty was executed in April 1962. His trial and death sentence became among the most controversial of the post-war years, with debate over his guilt still ongoing. A year after the murder, St Mary's Old Church made the headlines when graves were disturbed, coffins broken open and bones arranged on makeshift altars. Some worried that the village's recent notoriety had made Clophill an irresistible stage for those drawn to the occult. And, of course, murder does have a tendency to leave an air of violence, fear and death lingering in the landscape. Things started, or at least were first noticed, innocently enough. Two local boys, Duncan and Calvin, were on a bike ride in March 1963 when they decided to climb over the fence surrounding the ruined church. In his excellent book on the subject, Kevin Gates describes what happened next. As the crumbling tower of Old St Mary's loomed overhead, the scene below was like something from hell itself. A yellowing skull impaled on an iron spike stood in the centre of a circle of scattered bones. The boys saw blood and chicken feathers and a stylised cross drawn on the north wall. The sight, which might have made an adult back away, was irresistible to two young boys. They removed the skull from the spike and, according to Kevin's interview with Duncan some 50 years after the event, sat down with it while they enjoyed the spam sandwiches they'd brought with them. Being found with the skull and suspected of digging it up, Duncan and Calvin were frog-marched to the vicarage. Reverend Barker, the rector, listened to their story, sent them home, and telephoned the police. The subsequent search at the church confirmed the boys' story, with bones, feathers, and the iron spike all found in the nave. Outside, police discovered an open tomb with its £336 cover removed by what must have been more than a couple of children. The inscription on this read, "In memory of Jenny, the wife of Lawrence Humberstone, who departed this life January the 30th, 1770, aged 22 years. The outrage was immediate. Newspapers ran lurid headlines of black masses in a ruined church on the hill. Clergy and locals condemned what they saw as blasphemy, while journalists speculated about occult groups taking advantage of the church's isolation. Asked about this, Reverend Barker said, "I do not discount the idea of black magic. I am told there are people who are inclined that way in Ampthill." Poor Jenny was reinterred in her grave on the 23rd of March 1963, but sadly wasn't allowed an opportunity to rest. By the 26th of March, her tomb had been broken into again, and the press returned in force. Folklorist Eric Maple arrived to film an episode of current affairs programme This Week. Maple would go on to visit Clophill many times, writing of the location that those who feel the inclination for a truly Gothic experience should visit desolate Clophill to savour its wilderness of desecrated and looted tombs, symbols of the revival of black magic in the 20th century. While Jenny was finally buried, again and sealed under 8 tons of soil, the Black Magic Church continued to attract visitors. During the full moon of May 1963, students from a nearby college, dressed in sheets, took part in a prank at the site. On Midsummer's Eve in 1969, the graveyard was attacked again, and Reverend Barker decided to step down from his role, his ministry overshadowed by vandalism and rumours of devil worship. Clophill was now firmly cemented as a spot on the dark tourism trail, attracting well-known names like Peter Underwood, Janet and Colin Board, and ghost hunter Tony Brothel. It was on Tony's visit in 1972 that he took a photograph of his wife Georgina at the church. Behind her, inside the ruins, a figure can be seen, apparently floating 6 feet off the ground. A year later, the excavation of a tomb in the area where the apparition had been seen uncovered a nameplate for Sophia Mendham, who died in 1893. And this is why people say St Mary's is haunted by Sophie's ghost. Sophia Mendham was a real person, the wife of the rector at Clophill between 1844 and 1869. But does she haunt the ruins of St Mary's? Or is the photo just an example of pareidolia and the finding of Sophia's grave in that location a coincidence? Does the church suffer from nothing more than the after effects of a nearby tragedy and suggestion? Today, St Mary's Old Church is looked after by the Clophill Heritage Trust. The graveyard is still in use, and for a small fee you can take a guided tour, climb the tower and admire the beautiful views. Seeing it now it is difficult to reconcile this peaceful space with Eric Maple's description of a desolate wilderness, or to sense any of the reported evil or discomfort some visitors claim to experience. And yet, the stories remain. A ruin once abandoned to weather and time has become something more, a canvas for fear, fascination, and folklore. St Mary's Old Church reminds us that when the sacred is broken, what replaces it can be far harder to lay to rest. But Clophill is not unique in this. Churches across Britain bear the marks of rupture, whether through neglect, violence, or disaster. If Clophill's ruin speaks of isolation and desecration in the countryside, then Christchurch Greyfriars tells us what happens when the same forces strike at the very heart of the city. Christchurch Greyfriars, sometimes Christchurch Newgate, traces its origins to the Franciscan friary founded on the site in 1228. By the early 14th century, the place boasted a grand building, the second largest church in medieval London. In his 1884 book, W.J. Lofty says Christchurch must have been one of the most magnificent in the city. 300 feet long, with alabaster tombs and a marble floor, it was renowned for the number of celebrated people buried there. These include Queen Margaret, the second wife of Edward I, and Queen Isabella, wife of Edward II. And in 1429, famous London Mayor Dick Whittington founded a library there, making it a site of learning as well as prayer. Of course, a friary of such wealth and status wouldn't make it through the Reformation unscathed. The monastery was dissolved in 1538, the church closed, and the building looted and stripped. 10 years later, King Henry VIII granted the site to the City of London. Christchurch became a parish church, and some of the old friary buildings later became Christ's Hospital, a school for orphans. But having risen from the metaphorical ashes of the dissolution, the building couldn't survive the Great Fire of 1666. Starting with a spark in a bakery in Pudding Lane, 4 days of raging inferno left much of the city destroyed and 100,000 people homeless. And Christchurch was utterly consumed. Sir Christopher Wren, in the decades that followed the Great Fire, reconstructed nearly 50 churches in the city. Probably the most well-known is St Paul's Cathedral, but he also rebuilt Christchurch, creating a smaller but still striking building, with an organ built by Renatus Harris in 1690. This instrument became world-renowned, and when it was renovated and enlarged in 1827, Samuel Wesley played at the reopening. Mendelssohn also performed at the church, which became an important centre for music in London. It was on the night of the 29th of December 1940 that this remarkable building suffered its final blow. German incendiary bombs rained down across the city in what the Ministry of Home Security called a deliberate attempt to set London ablaze. Christchurch was gutted. Its roof collapsed, its interior burned, only the tower and outer walls remained. This time, it was not rebuilt, and in 1989, the nave became a public garden and memorial. Today, roses climb where pews once stood, and benches rest where worshippers gathered. An oasis of calm in the heart of the city. Though on the paranormal front, it's not always as quiet as it seems. If you visit the garden on an autumn morning, you may meet a solitary monk cloaked in a cowl. he is reportedly glimpsed drifting through the churchyard, dissolving into a mist if people get too close. Some have suggested he's a guardian, watching over the space, but I wonder if he's something more. A reminder, perhaps, of the Franciscans who prayed, taught and buried their dead here for 3 centuries before Henry VIII's dissolution scattered their order. An echo of the loss of a sacred way of life violently torn away. The ghost of Queen Isabella, remembered by history as the she-wolf of France, is an altogether darker spectre. Daughter of King Philip IV, Isabella married Edward II in 1308 when she was 12 years old. An intelligent and shrewd political operator, Isabella disliked her husband's favourite, Piers Gaveston. And though it is a matter of debate among historians, she's thought to have orchestrated Edward's murder at Berkeley Castle in 1327. At the end of her life, Isabella took the habit of the Poor Clares, a Franciscan order of nuns, and when she died in 1358, she was buried at Christ Church, along with a casket containing the preserved heart of her dead husband. Is the misty female form seen walking the grounds, clutching something in her hands, the ghost of Isabella? Like so many historic figures, she's rumoured to haunt other places as well. But here, at the place of her burial and holding Edward's heart, maybe that's a sign of a penance that even death has not absolved. Another troubled spirit seen here is Lady Agnes Hungerford. Sometimes referred to as Alice, Agnes was one of the most beautiful women in Tudor England. She was the wife of John Cotell, who died suddenly in 1518 at Farleigh Castle, the residence of Sir Edward Hungerford. A few months later, Agnes married Sir Edward, who himself died in 1522. Edward's death left Agnes without the protection of a wealthy and powerful husband, and the circumstances of John's passing, strangled and his body burned in the castle's kitchen furnace, came out. Indicted as an accessory to John's murder, Agnes was executed at Tyburn and laid to rest at Christ Church. One summer evening, her spirit was seen by a night watchman who recognised her because of her beauty and grace. Terrified, he ran from the site and resigned from his job the next day. Finally, there is Elizabeth Barton, the Holy Maid of Kent. A Catholic nun, Elizabeth became famous in the 1520s for her prophecies. She met with Cardinal Wolsey and Henry VIII and was highly respected. But by the 1530s, Elizabeth's visions were less in line with the interests of the king. She opposed his marriage to Anne Boleyn and prophesied that if he remarried, he would die within a few months. Arrested in 1533, she was forced to confess that she had made up her revelations, and an act concerning her guilt and punishment received royal assent at the end of March 1534. Less than a month later, at the age of 28, Elizabeth was hanged at Tyburn, her head displayed on a spike on London Bridge before burial at Christ Church. Her spirit is said to be a wild and restless figure. She appears and vanishes at random, carrying with her a palpable air of pain and panic that, given the manner of her death, is quite understandable. Today, this garden seems tranquil, but the ghosts of Christ Church remind us of the imprint nearly 800 years of liturgy, music, life, and death can leave on a location. From a village ruin on a Bedfordshire hill to a bombed-out churchyard in the square mile, these places show us that sacred ground never truly lies empty. Whether through desecration, fire or war, when churches are broken open, they gather new layers of meaning. Whether that's folklore, myth or ghost story, it's as if the loss of their original purpose leaves a space that must be filled, that calls to ritual, remembrance and respect. Rural or urban, deserted or surrounded by millions, churches remain thresholds between the past and the present, between the living and the dead. Perhaps that is why they linger in our imaginations. These ruins are not just the echoes of faith, but reminders of all the lives, the grief, and the hopes bound up within their walls. To walk among them is to step into a conversation across centuries, one that is still unfolding. I hope you've enjoyed walking through these stories with me. If so, please like, subscribe and share. And I'll see you again soon with more Hidden Realms.